Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dunya Medhat, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. We are joined today by Daniel White from MCS. This is a Retrofit Information Support and Expertise, or RISE event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero and delivered by Turner & Townsend. There will be a relatively short presentation followed by plenty of opportunity for questions and discussion. The event will be about an hour long and will finish on time. Please keep your microphones muted and cameras switched off. During presentation, the slide deck will be made available after the event in a follow-up email to everyone that attended today. There will be a clean recording of this and all other masterclasses in the resources section of the RISE website. We will provide all of our useful links in the chat. Please ask questions in the chat function as we go, or there will be an opportunity to directly ask questions after the presentation. And finally, there will be a quick poll and a word cloud at the end of the session. Please complete those to help us understand the level of knowledge in our topics. Thank you again for joining. I will now hand over to Daniel to start us off for today.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. So my name's Dan White. I'm the Market Development Director at MCS. What we're going to try and run through is slightly what MCS is, how you use it, where it fits in, and then we have some changes coming next year, so to describe some of those changes and some of the rationale behind them. All right, forgive me, I'm driving somebody else's slides. There we go. So what is MCS? Who are we? So a little bit of origin story around this as well. We were created in 2008 by what is now the Department for Net Security. At the time, I think it was DEC. And we were intended to create additional requirements for installers to justify their inclusion in government subsidy. So if you were to receive money for solar panels being fitted to roofs or heat pumps being fitted to houses, and that money was to come from government, then MCS was intended to give government a sense of confidence that they were giving the money to the right businesses, and consumers a sense of confidence that these technologies that they're understanding and they maybe don't understand themselves are appropriate and appropriately installed. So we are a quality mark, and the quality mark is the key element to what we provide, because that is what gives consumers confidence in investing in their own properties, and crucially governments in supporting investments through either schemes like the boiler upgrade scheme or warm homes or Eco4, or indeed Home Energy Scotland grants, and several schemes across Wales and soon Northern Ireland, we all hope, as they begin to get themselves organised. We have two elements to the scheme. We have a set of standards that apply to, I'm going to say three elements actually, a set of standards that apply to the installation of technologies. And we currently have actually 8 technologies, going all the way out from combined heat and power microsystems, which are almost never heard of, through to solar PV panels on rooftops, which are our biggest technology, which we'll talk to in a minute, and encompassing small-scale wind turbines, which are beginning to come back after many years. But the bulk of the scheme are solar panels, heat pumps, and increasingly batteries. The products that our installers use are also certified, and they are certified not just to safety standards, but also to performance standards. So we require testing of all products which go into the scheme, and that again gives the confidence to a consumer and to government that they are getting involved with both an installer who has the competence and a product which is appropriate to their investment or subsidy. The way we write our standards is slightly reflective. We take regulations and planning permissions and guidance notes and BSIs and IET guides, etc., etc. And we pull them together from often multiple trades into one standard. So you will see that our heat pump standard refers to plumbing regulations and electrical regulations, refers to both SIPSI stuff and IET stuff. Contrary to popular opinion, we don't set planning requirements. Government does that, and then we reflect them within our standards when they ask us to do that for them. So I think the last bit which is missing from this slide is that we are a voluntary scheme. So we're not regulated. We don't have an off at the beginning of our title, which also means, therefore, that our only powers are to our voluntary members. So we can't reach into extra regulation and impose standards at the end of it if we were trying to do that. Right, so we're going to have a little look at just the shape of the scheme, because I think it helps to understand how it fits into policy, and it helps you to understand what the scope is, and in some case, what the importance of the scheme is. So it's got reformatted slightly, so it's a bit small, but hopefully the shape of the graph is visible. So what it's showing you is the just short of 2 million certificates that we've written since 2008, which is the left-hand side of the graph. The precipitous drop-off on the right is the fact that it shows the first of the next month, and that's not started yet, or it hadn't when we grabbed the slide. We have about just over 5,000 businesses that work with us, sort of on average. And it's sort of more biased towards heat pump on the knowledge on this, but they seem to employ about 5 installers each. So you're looking about 25, maybe 30,000 people involved with the scheme. We have about 100,000 products certified to the scheme, the huge majority of which are fixings and hooks and rails, which are all individually certified within the PV product list. Whereas we're going to look at some heat pump numbers and things in a minute. What you see over on the left there is the beautifully named solar coaster. The period from about 2011 through to 2015, where policy changed the price of the feed-in tariff and volumes flew up and down with scary excess. So really nobody knew what was happening from one month to the next. When you then look at the right-hand side of the map of the graph, the sort of post-energy crisis, living cost crisis, whatever you want to call it, post-Ukraine shape, those numbers don't look as dramatic, but they are bigger than the peaks of 2012, which are those great big ones over on the left. So we've ended up in a much calmer, much more predictable and much more successful market sort of 10, 12 years on than those original days of subsidy. We're going to come back to heat pumps and we're going to come back to battery. What is worth saying is you can see a couple of inflection points in this. There is a massive drop off there in the middle. That is 2015, David Cameron, and removal of planning permissions and all sorts of this, and what was it, all this green crap or whatever he said. We then have 5 years of quiet, and that you get a little dink in the middle, which is the very last gasp of the feed-in tariff. The dink after that is COVID. There's that little blip. And then after that, we end up in something really quite positive and quite sustained in terms of growth, a very different pattern to the years before. And that's kind of where we are now. And when you scratch into that, you do begin to see some differences from the previous years. Let me see if I can persuade this to go along one. There we go. So, I've forgotten I've got a fun cursor. You can bring that in. So this is just looking at solar panels. 1.6 million certificates written to date. That is about 4 gigawatts of installed capacity. If the sun was shining everywhere in the UK with perfect alignment at the same time, there would be more coming off rooftops than comes out of a nuclear power station. But this being the sunny UK, that of course is never quite true. So this is that solar coaster. the crazy times where there were far more than 4,000 installers active, delivering less than the 4,000 now do. So it was a less efficient time. The industry is more efficient, it's more effective, it's more productive now, and as you can see, more stable. Last year, 2023, which sort of takes you through to this little dink here, so that was 1 gigawatt of capacity installed in a single year. So with the 4 total that we have, you can see how quiet that gap was in between. So the 4,000 is beginning to catch up with the 2012 numbers, and it's catching up at a higher level now than it was before. So, you know, we're heading into some good times in PV. For those of you who've been involved in PV, there was, you know, a very clear acceleration from, I can't quite read it myself, I think about here is the invasion of Ukraine. There's this crazy acceleration which got linked into COVID shortages out of China and Suez Canal getting blocked and all kinds of supply chain shenanigans, that there was that, you know, a year where the supply chain went dry and prices went up, and then a year when the supply chain flooded and prices came down. Interesting, in certified numbers, we didn't see a great deal of change. It kind of went up and stayed up. This was a very quiet December last year for some reason, but there's been a pickup again ahead of year, end of year this year. So, you know, quite a comfortable pattern over that end is what we see, and we see that that's still growing in the, you know, the near-term future. Something which is changing radically is battery. We created an electrical battery in ESS standard 3 years ago. It took it about a year to get going. That is beginning to fly. About half of our certified businesses for solar panels are now certified for batteries. But that 50% penetration, excuse me, is only giving us about 15% of the volume. So for every 100,000 solar panels, we're only seeing 15,000 PV certificates. What we do see is enormous overlap. So 85% of the certificates we see with a battery have a solar panel battery certificate raised at the same time. And if you look at the rest of them, we end up at 98% of them coinciding with an old PV installation already existing. So I guess not unsurprisingly, most batteries are going in to support solar panels on roofs, not so much on the just using the sort of agile tariffs and things yet. Heat pump in some ways is the most dramatic change. Heat pump doesn't have the craziness of the 11, 12s, 13s. It never really sort of, you know, jumps off the runway. It sets at a very sort of quiet tone through to sometime around here, which is about 2018, 19. And then you get sort of Theresa May really beginning to talk about net zero. And even before COVID, which is in here, it's just the beginning of something. You know, we get down from below thousands to getting up to about 1,000 a month back then. Since then, there has just been dramatic acceleration. This big spike in the middle is the last of the renewable heat incentive. Lots of people rushing for the door. Boiler upgrade scheme has come back even stronger. So if you see, you know, the angle of this graph has steepened compared to before that. So we're now operating up at, you know, almost 6,000 installations a month, having been at you know, just below 1,000 pre-COVID. So very dramatic uplift in heat pumps, albeit from a tiny base. This will see maybe 60,000 heat pumps installed in a year, with somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million gas boilers installed in the year. So albeit that it looks really positive, there's still an awful long way to go if you want to get to any kind of catch up with gas or indeed meeting of government targets. So if you want to be part of that and you sort of get a sense of the volumes which are going on in there, then let's just dwell here for a minute and maybe where some of those volumes come from. There are four broad areas nowadays where MCS certification sort of fits. One is the clear consumer-based, able to pay funding mechanisms such as Boiler Upgrade Scheme or Home Energy Scotland grants. The second are government-funded warm homes, or quasi-government funded Eco4s, where an MCS certificate is requested or required within PAS 2035's Trustmark effectively use MCS certification for heat pumps and microgen technologies. Increasingly, there is a new homes requirement, and NHBC are referring to MCS with great regularity now and using that to confirm compliance at their end. So we're seeing heat pumps and solar panels going on to new builds and being certified. And then there is a section which are, just off-grid individuals doing this themselves. Very few of those. Well, solar panel has a self-funded section, which is significant, less significant with an heat pump because boiler upgrade scheme is pointed at them. So if you wanted to become MCS, what would you start with? So you would start with understanding what we ask of you. So we have a set of standards which are available, open to the public and trade, obviously, on mcscertified.com. There's a section up at the top called standards, and it will take you into the installer standards if you want to look at those, and then it goes in by technology. There is an overarching scheme document called MCS 001. That explains what we want of you. And the element that matters the most in that is a sense of appropriateness. So when you are audited, because that's the essence of the scheme, you will have an audit probably at the moment once a year. And when that job is picked, your processes will be assessed to see whether you are pointing towards a quality outcome, and then they will check one of your outcomes. So the burden of MCS is actually to be ready for audit. You do not know which installation will be audited. Therefore, they should all be to scheme specification, because otherwise you will get caught out at audit and therefore potentially suspended or withdrawn from the scheme. Understanding that is important. And I can't remember whether I used the language on a later slide, but I'll use it now just in case. We talk a lot about, or there's a lot of talk about quality management systems. They need to be appropriate. If you sit in a van on your own and write your own paperwork and quotes and everything at your kitchen table on a Friday night, then you are going to have a conversation with yourself when something goes wrong. If you are insert name of, national corporate installer, you are going to need a set of quality management systems that ensure that problems in installation are passed back up the supply chain, internal supply chain, to make sure that they are not repeated, that quality is improved, that standards are driven up. And they are very different levels of appropriateness. We do not expect small businesses to be running big quality management, formalized systems. We expect you to write it down as a bare minimum. And in the modern age, type it down, because it's an awful lot easier to audit if you do it that way. And getting that balance right has been something that, maybe the communications team has struggled with over the years. So job one, have a look at the documents. They feel a bit scary, but broadly what they ask of you is to demonstrate that you know where you're trying to get to and be able to have that audited when somebody arrives to look at you. So when you are asked to demonstrate it, you will be asked to demonstrate fundamentally by one of the CBs, the certifying bodies, and we'll come to them in a minute. So they will look at you, and that is NAPIT, NIC, EIC, sort of OFTECs and APHCs on the plumbing and heating side. They will start to look at your business and they will expect to see some competency in your business. Now, the reason we exist is that, let's use solar panels for a minute. Solar panels is not an electrical job. It is a roofing and electrical job. There is more than one competency coming together in that installation. And those two competencies and their interactions need explaining to the consumer, who is our ultimate goal in terms of providing confidence to. So somebody needs to be, a business needs to be demonstrate to, it's always my friend Mrs. Jones in my language, that you have done the calculations that what you strap to her roof will not blow off and whistle down the street on the next named storm or whatever we're up to this year. that the load will be sufficient that if it gets covered in roof, it's not coming through into her back bedroom. And equally, that the alignment of it and the shading of it will be clear to her as to what that means as to how much energy she will get back. Because if it's underneath the tree, then she's not going to get so much back. If that tree grows over years, that's different. You need to explain that to her up front, but that's all part of that consumer confidence. So we give you tools to help you do that across heat, across generation, across storage, and they are the performance estimation tools that we ask you to use to link between the specification of the project and the explanation of it to the consumer. So step 2 is find your competency, and competency in this context means qualification. You broadly need somebody within your business, can be subcontracted, not so subcontracted is the wrong word, contracted within your business, that is a qualified roofer, a qualified electrician, a qualified plumber, possibly a qualified refrigerant engineer, all of the elements that you'll be using to deliver your jobs. So demonstrating quality is about proving this to your CB. So this is part about, I did have a slide on this, so we've partially covered this. The smaller the business, the more rudimentary these processes can be, but they still need to be auditable. And this is the paperwork burden of MCS. You will need something that somebody can audit. Now, it can be very simple, but it needs to be fit for purpose. And that's what the auditor will assess. You're running a multi-million pound, installation team business. It is going to have to be a lot more robust than a one business, one van environment. So customer care. At the moment, what we will ask of you is that you also join a consumer code. There are 2 of them out there, RECC rather, and HICE. My suggestion is always in these points that you talk to both of them, ask them how they work, because they work quite differently, understand their approaches and which one will work best for you. They could well provide you with really good insight in how to deal with some high value contracts with potentially vulnerable customers under Consumer Rights Act, etc., etc. You know, we have an average value of over £10,000 across the scheme. Stepping up from a one van business, maybe focused on combi boiler installations up into full heat pump installations, can be a very big change in terms of average contract value. And there's things that need to be thought about in terms of consumer protections and approaches in that. Your commitment to quality workmanship will be assessed by your CB, so you need to choose a CB as well. If you are already a member of a competent persons scheme, nearly everybody sticks with the CB that they are with. So if you are with NAPIT and you stick with NAPIT, it will facilitate some of your notifications, etc. afterwards. But other certification bodies do exist. So new kids on the block like the IAA recently, and equally some old, sort of like more single trade focused like APHC or Offtech, whereas NAPIT and NIC will spread across the electrical CPS side and the plumbing CPS side. So choose your CB. Your CB and your consumer code will charge you to be a member. They're roughly 500 quid a year, and we will charge you 30 quid each time you write a certificate. So call that £1,000 is the price of access to the boiler upgrade scheme, to Eco4 projects, to Warm Home projects, to Home Energy Scotland. And they are the price that effectively government asks of you to allow you to spend their money on their behalf. And that, frankly, is the reason for most people joining MCS. One day you will all come and do it and join us to prove your quality to the world. But we fully accept that right now you do it to prove your quality to government so that they will allow you into their funding. So this is slightly mistitled. Let me talk about it a slightly different way. We came out of government ownership 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, and are now owned by a charity. So any surplus that we make goes up to our charity. And I think they've just about given away £3 million now since coming out of government as well. So that's kind of where our surpluses go. Once we had steadied the ship after leaving government, we started to look at what people want from MCS. So we started with consumers, and he had sort of two pretty clear messages. One was that they wanted competent people, in whom they can have confidence in their homes installing this equipment, and that they can have confidence in that product, that it will have a performance standard and a safety standard wrapped around it, which somebody has looked at independently. And then they wanted protection through the membership of a scheme in case anything goes wrong, a sort of who you're going to call type backup. Installers, if honest, I can draw a line down the middle of installer responses. Those inside already members of MCS want greater policing and it to be harder for everybody else to join, and it broadly to become tougher. Everybody outside of MCS wants it to become easier and less burdensome and all the rest of it. And I think that's kind of reflective of the last one, which is that there's a slight misunderstanding across what we do. I have a very simple view. We should not be asking you to do something that an already quality good business is doing. What we will ask you to do is to prove it to someone at audit once a year. And that's the bit where we add the extra burden. It is the proof of what you do rather than trying to encourage you to do something extra. If you are not supporting your consumers, if you are not doing a quality job, if you are not understanding your installation process and communicating through to that consumers, you probably won't make it into MCS anyway, because you won't have those systems that government are looking for. Once you're in, it's a case of proving it, documenting it so it can be audited. So the changes that we are proposing, which will be coming out next year, is firstly to bring consumers far closer to the middle of our business. And that will mean by strengthening consumer protections. We want to simplify the requirements. Now, that is not making it easier or less or facilitating lower quality installations. We want to make it simpler for installers to get there. Now, that will be somewhat procedural and it will be focused very much around the element of audit. And we'll come back to that in a second. We want to radically change, honestly, our relationship with both the certification bodies, so NAPIT, NIC, and our installers, our 5,000 customers. We will end up with a direct contractual relationship with both of those groups going forwards, which is going to mean that we can be far more involved and intimate with both of them, which will improve communications between us all. And then to sort of sort the process out and how we get compliance aligned with what the consumer protection is at the top of the page and create a virtuous circle between all of those. So the consumer outcomes. So first of all, in many ways, up until the point of certification, a consumer should not feel any difference. We are going to ask that installations are done to the same standards as they were before by the same businesses who are just as good as before, with products which are just as good as before. But post certification, we will be doing more with consumers. Crucially, that we will contact every consumer that receives a certificate. And from that, we will bring back a survey result on that installation, i.e. by the installer, and on their process and outcomes. So we will start to understand consumer satisfaction. In that outreach, we will let those customers know, consumers know, that if they have a problem with their installer, i.e. they are unresponsive or they are not supporting a customer when an installation is not delivered on its promises, then we are the people that they should complain to. To simplify this was a key finding of both Citizens Advice and the Competition and Market Authority, that the market is just too split. So just talk to us. That is that protection that they wanted on slide 1, and that's what we'll deliver by telling them that we're here to support them. We're also here to support the installers because we know there are vexatious consumers out there, and we'll also be able to identify them. And that's where something like ADR comes in. So we will provide free ADR, which will be binding on contractors going forward, which will be part of the new contract we have with them. And we will be thinking about this concept of delivered quality for our consumers, which we'll come back to in a minute. And then there will be financial protections of any warranties which are issued. That is currently an IBG. There is a lot of work going on between the Financial Conduct Authority, the Competition and Market Authority, Department for Net Zero, and anybody else who seems to have an opinion on what those financial protections should look like. So what warranties should be when issued by an MCS business, and then how those warranties should be protected if that business were to cease to trade or become unresponsive. What will this mean for installers? So it is a reduction on the focus on paperwork and a shift towards delivered quality. Now that is crucially at the point of audit. So when your CB turns up, they're going to turn up at a site in the future, and they're going to look at the quality of that installation. And if your DC cables are well labeled and your external pipes are well insulated and the consumer understands what you've done for them and the installation meets the design and all of that stuff, they're going to go, thank you very much. And then hopefully not spend any time in your paperwork. If they find that the heat pumps on upside down, the PV's on the wrong side of the roof, and the consumer didn't know what they were getting, they're going to be saying, well, show me the paperwork that gave this, that created this outcome. And they're going to go back into the weeds of your paperwork as they always done in the past. Those non-compliances will feed into your record going forwards as an installer. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about risk-based assessment frequency, and they're going to feed into that process. So as installers, you will have a direct contractual relationship with us from next year, which will mean that we talk to you about your complaints. It will mean that we bring you through ADR where that is appropriate, both positively, i.e. to get resolutions with difficult customers, but also negatively if you are the one in the way, I'm afraid. We will also be doing probity checks on you as an installer, a role which was previously done by the Consumer Code. So we will be looking at directors, we'll be looking at county courts, we'll be looking at credit scores. We'll also be feeding back that customer satisfaction data that we have from outreach, and they will come together to mean that we no longer require membership of a Consumer Code. So saving you possibly 500 quid a year, which will be material if you were at the small end of the industry. When we talked about competence earlier, it was all focused on this sort of like all-powerful being called the nominated technical person in current scheme. We're going to slightly dissolve that, and each certificate is going to have a technical supervisor, sort of akin to a QS for those of you who are electricians, who's put their name to the certificate, and that will be gathered in our database. That person needs to supervise that there was a competent electrician signing the electrics off, a competent G3 person signing off the pressurized vessel, etc., etc., etc. They do not have to hold all of those qualifications themselves. They need to ensure that those qualifications were there at the point of commissioning and at the point of completion. And we will be gathering that name. It will also be another insight into the risk of a business. You know, if you have a different technical supervisor on every job, that would be interesting. If you have the same technical supervisor on hundreds of jobs, that would be interesting. So all of those are going to feed into a view of the complexity of your business. So I think we've mentioned that we won't require consumer codes anymore. And crucially, there are no changes to the installation standards. The requirement and definition of quality in a job are not changing. What we are addressing is the method of audit. So my friends CBs, we're going to have a new relationship with them. There have been lots of comments, I would say complaints over the years of inconsistency, both between CBs and within CBs. We are going to be working very hard ironing that out and getting some consistency over time and space. A lot of that will be through a standardized assessment criteria, such that we will be imposing on CBs a minimum set of criteria for a heat pump assessment, for a PV assessment. Now, those criteria will change over time. So if, God forbid, we do end up to a point where every external pipe is beautifully insulated and taped and sealed and goes through the wall with waterproof insulation on it, then maybe that won't be number one on everybody's list. But for a while, I suspect it will be. And this is to move towards this concept of focusing on the delivered quality, on how good you are as an installer at your job on the roof, in the garden, doing that, delivering that technology, and not on how good you are at paperwork. Now, if you are no good at your job, they're going to work out whether it was the paperwork that was doing it wrong. So the paperwork needs to be there, because otherwise you cannot have a quality system which is going to deliver that to people. It does not need to be complicated, but it needs to be clear. So the CBs will remain. 17065 is an ISO, an international standard which defines a way of assessing businesses. So this will be, everybody will be assessed with 17065 process, and we will be looking at the CBs and really holding them to account, that they deliver to that process. Now, risk-based. This is going to be the biggest change. If you are small and perfectly formed, you should not be receiving the same level of assessment as a poor national large-scale installer. It's wrong. The poor national scale installer should be receiving more assessments than the small and perfectly formed by right of being bigger and of being poorer. A great national scale should be receiving fewer than a poor national scale. So you can kind of see, a matrix developing, can't you? Where there's a quality of installation up one side and a number of installations down the other side, and there'll be sort of boxes as to how many you get. The CBs are going to have to determine this, working very hard with us, as to which box people sit in, and you will be able to move through boxes over time. So the more assessments you get with no non-compliances, the lower you will shift down that axis. The more installations you do, the higher you will shift up the other axes. So the burden on you will change over time. It will hopefully mean that for small, good, high quality businesses, your cost of audit, of assessment will fall over time. The bigger you get, the higher it will become. The worse you get, the higher it will become. So there will be a squeeze on poor quality businesses, defined by the number of non-compliances they are found to have committed. Do you commit non-compliance? I think so. In audit, based on the quality of their installations, not necessarily their paperwork. So that's what's coming. It's going to be much more focused on your delivered quality, and also much more focused on the complexity and size of your business. I don't think I really need to spend too much time on this. What it says is that going forward, both us as MCS and your CB will be crucially and intimately involved in delivering you to MCS compliance and joining the scheme. That will be through an agreement which we will send to you to sign, and that will be you giving you permission to write certificates into our database. I think we'll just skip that one for a sec. So how to prepare for all of this? The new scheme is coming in the new year. There's a body called UCAS who assess us. They've spent a year assessing us now, and they still haven't given us the answer. When they give us that answer, we will publish the scheme. We're really hoping it's going to be in January, and we will do that with a brand new website, which makes it far easier for consumers to understand our new commitments to them, installers to understand where their documentation is, and product manufacturers to understand where their documentation is. So they will all come up together. At that point, we go back to familiarize yourself. If you are already an MCS certified business, you are likely to come and join the new scheme at your renewal date. That will depend on each individual CB, and on the next line, once we get approval, we've also got to get each of the CBs approved by UCAS. So even with a fair wind and lots of enthusiasm, we don't anticipate much happening before Easter at this stage. But from that point onwards, you should be invited by your CB to join the new scheme. Now, some of you might rush to that, some of you might hang back. We don't have any great view on that, but within a year, we wish everybody to be working within the new scheme, embracing the new commitment to consumers, working with us on probity and outreach and customer satisfaction, and beginning to discover where you sit in that risk profile and then managing that, ideally improving it, because that will reduce your costs going forwards. So quality is going to be rewarded by lower audit cost. And in a funny sort of way, that summarizes the essence of what we're doing, because that will improve that consumer confidence at the end of the day. That, I think, is my final slide. It is. Over to you for questions.
Thank you so much for that. I certainly learned a lot. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can put them in the chat.